fuck you looking at, fat boy? I'm gonna waste my time on this piece of shit.
The film opens at a high school, where a group of bullies led by Miles targets students they see as weak. Their usual victim is Jimmy Mulligan, a chubby, kind-hearted boy who endures their torment without ever fighting back. By his side are his two close friends, Andy and Bobby, who are also labeled as losers. But over time, Miles's relentless insults begin to wear Jimmy down, draining his strength and pushing him to the edge of what he can endure. Although she sensed something was wrong, Jimmy's mom couldn't get him to open up about the struggles he faced after school. Jimmy avoided his friends and turned down every invitation to hang out, afraid of running into Miles, the bully who lived in the same neighborhood. But staying cautious didn't keep him safe. On the way to school, Jimmy unexpectedly crossed paths with Miles and his crew. The bully brazenly demanded $100, a sum far beyond what Jimmy could afford. Every attempt to explain only made the situation more tense. Miles grew increasingly aggressive, constantly pressuring Jimmy to hand over the $100 and threatening him to stay silent. But just as the tension peaked, Miles suddenly backed off. He had spotted Vinny watching from a distance. Vinny was well known for being tough, fearless, and influential, with a zero-tolerance attitude toward bullying. His quiet, yet intimidating presence was enough to make even the most ruthless bullies think twice. Miles didn't just bully Jimmy, he frequently targeted Bobby as well, mocking him for his slightly feminine style. After being publicly humiliated in front of the entire class, Bobby was devastated, and Jimmy did his best to comfort him, vowing not to let the bullies keep getting away with it. He invited Andy and Bobby to lunch in the cafeteria and insisted on treating them. When they saw Jimmy digging into a larger-than-usual meal with enthusiasm, both friends couldn't help but be surprised by the change in him. Andy and Bobby never made fun of Jimmy's eating habits. On the contrary, they tried to help him open up and even introduced him to Adrienne, a girl from their school who often stole glances at Jimmy with quiet interest during lunch in the cafeteria. Just as things were starting to feel more comfortable, Miles showed up again, plopping down next to Jimmy and demanding the $100 he claimed was owed. His harassment pushed another student to speak up and tell him to back off. Instead of leaving, Miles exploded, shouting insults and berating the student, instantly turning the cafeteria atmosphere tense and suffocating. However, another student, taller and stronger than Miles, stepped in, deciding it was time to teach him a lesson for causing trouble. Miles's aggression vanished instantly, and he hurried out of the cafeteria. But the conflict didn't end there. After school, Miles confronted Jimmy again, still pressuring him for the money.
Hey man,
Jimmy stood his ground, refusing to back down and insisting he didn't owe Miles anything. His defiance enraged Miles, who suddenly lunged at Jimmy and attacked him right there on the sidewalk. Just as Miles was about to finish the beating, an elderly man appeared and threatened to call the police, startling him enough to flee the scene. The man introduced himself as Mr. Action and brought Jimmy home to treat his injuries. While there, Jimmy noticed a photo of a boxer on the wall and was surprised to learn that Mr. Action was once a national boxing champion. Fueled by a determination to stand up to Miles and end the bullying, Jimmy pleaded with him for training. Though no longer strong enough to coach directly, Mr. Action agreed to help and promised to call on some friends to support Jimmy in his training journey. After bringing Jimmy home, Mr. Action had to face the boy's parents, who were horrified to see their son's black eye. He explained everything that had happened and suggested enrolling Jimmy in a self-defense class. Though hesitant, they asked for time to think it over. A few days later, Mr. Action heard a knock at the door, and there stood Jimmy with both eyes bruised. Realizing how serious the situation had become, his parents didn't hesitate any longer. Grateful for Mr. Action's concern, they quickly agreed to let Jimmy learn boxing and even personally took him to Manny's Boxing Training Center, a gym run by Mr. Action's close friend, so he could receive proper instruction. Mr. Action asked Manny to train Jimmy, And with just one look and a brief explanation, Manny understood the boy's situation. Although Jimmy had clearly been through a lot, it was the determination in his eyes that convinced Manny to help on the condition that Jimmy commit to training seriously and never give up. Under Manny's strict program, Jimmy began training consistently, making steady progress with Mr. Action keeping a close eye on his development. During one session, Jimmy confided in Mr. Action about how Miles kept demanding the $100. The story only deepened Mr. Action's resolve to help Jimmy grow strong enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Mr. Action immediately came up with a plan. Instead of avoiding the situation, Jimmy should offer to pay Miles $200, but only after a 1-month delay. He believed that within that time, Jimmy could train hard enough to defend himself and ultimately not have to pay a cent. The next day, when Miles showed up demanding money, Jimmy calmly told him he had taken a part-time job and would get paid in a month. He offered double the amount if Miles agreed to wait. Though annoyed by the long delay at first, Miles eventually agreed, temporarily backing off. For the first time in weeks, Jimmy was no longer being harassed by Miles over the money. However, during that afternoon's boxing session, he seemed exhausted, sluggish, and lacking energy. Although Jimmy blamed it on physical fatigue, Manny, drawing on his experience as a seasoned coach, quickly realized the issue was emotional. Concerned by the shift in Jimmy's attitude, he gently brought it up, expressing his worry and openly admitting that it felt like Jimmy had lost his drive for training. On the way home, Mr. Action noticed Jimmy's discouragement and gently asked what was wrong. Jimmy finally opened up, revealing the frustration he had been bottling up. He felt like all his training had been pointless. Despite giving it his all, he still saw himself as too weak to stand up to Miles or protect himself. Sensing the disappointment in Jimmy's voice, Mr. Action offered reassurance, emphasizing that no effort is ever wasted. He reminded Jimmy that the lessons learned through hard work would have lasting value, no matter the outcome. When Jimmy got home, his father noticed that his son's health seemed to be declining. Though concerned, he didn't pressure Jimmy, choosing instead to respect his decision to continue training. He shared a quiet hope that one day, Jimmy would grow strong enough to teach his own children how to defend themselves, so they wouldn't have to grow up in fear like he had. Those words reignited a fire in Jimmy. Reflecting deeply, he realized he had to push himself harder than ever, committing to his training with renewed seriousness and determination. The next day, Miles and his crew resumed harassing Jimmy and his friends. This time, they crossed the line by physically attacking Bobby in front of a crowd. Jimmy rushed over and found Bobby sitting alone, crying, and tried to comfort him. Overwhelmed and hopeless, Bobby felt completely powerless against Miles and his gang, convinced that no one, not even the teachers, could do anything to help. But Jimmy refused to give in. He had a plan and was determined to defeat Miles and put an end to the vicious cycle of school bullying once and for all. Fueled by determination, Jimmy raced home, jumped on his bike, and sped straight to Manny's gym, something he rarely did before due to the distance. In his excitement, Jimmy accidentally bumped into Manny and fell to the floor. But instead of getting angry, Manny smiled, sensing the fierce determination burning inside his young trainee. From that moment on, Jimmy approached every training session with focus and fiery passion. Noticing his rapid progress, Manny decided to intensify the program, introducing tougher physical workouts and mixed martial arts techniques to help Jimmy become a more well-rounded fighter. While Manny focused on building Jimmy's physical strength, Mr. Action continued to nurture his fighting spirit, offering steady support and heartfelt advice. At school, Jimmy confided in Andy about his boxing training and his goal to defeat Miles and put an end to the bullying. Around the same time, Adrian approached Jimmy and struck up a conversation, and the two quickly agreed to meet after school. They attended a party at a friend's house, where warm, honest conversations revealed a deep connection and natural chemistry between them. In that intimate and genuine atmosphere, a budding romance began to form between Jimmy and Adrian. As Jimmy enjoyed his newfound happiness with Adrian, Eddie, one of Miles's closest friends, began taunting and insulting them, mocking their relationship. But unlike before, Jimmy was now full of confidence. He stood up to Eddie firmly, forcing him to back off. Time passed quickly, and the day of Jimmy's long-awaited showdown with Miles finally arrived. This time, he was no longer the timid, bullied kid he once was, but someone determined to end the threats and extortion that had haunted him for so long. That morning, Jimmy woke up with a rare sense of calm and unwavering confidence. As soon as he arrived at school, Miles confronted him, threatening to take it out on Jimmy's friends if he backed out or tried to avoid the upcoming showdown. Feeling the pressure mount, Jimmy slipped into the bathroom, where he unexpectedly ran into Vinny, a student who was already aware of the feud between him and Miles. Knowing Jimmy had been training at Manny's gym, Vinny offered words of encouragement and wished him luck in the upcoming fight. What neither of them realized was that Eddie had been hiding in a nearby stall, overhearing every word. Moments later, Eddie rushed off to inform Miles. Following Miles's orders, Eddie contacted Billy Glassjaw, a notorious troublemaker, and arranged for him to challenge Jimmy right on school grounds. Word of the upcoming showdown between Jimmy and Miles spread quickly, capturing the attention of both students and teachers, all eager to see who would come out on top. Jimmy approached Miles and his crew with a newfound confidence, and Miles immediately sensed that the fear that once controlled Jimmy was gone. Faced with this unexpected shift, Miles quickly devised a new plan to use Glassjaw to take Jimmy down swiftly and brutally. However, Vinny stepped in and had his crew abduct Glassjaw, forcing Miles to face Jimmy in a fair fight. As the showdown began, Jimmy struggled against Miles's relentless and powerful blows, but quitting was never an option. Slowly but surely, Jimmy began to fight back, landing precise, forceful punches of his own. Even after taking a heavy hit to the face, he stood his ground, unshaken. No longer the weak kid he once was, Jimmy had become someone who could defend himself. With unbreakable resolve, he fought not just to reclaim his dignity, but for every underdog who had ever been bullied like him. As the fight tilted in Jimmy's favor, Miles grew increasingly desperate. When a few of his crew members tried to intervene, Andy and Bobby remained still, silently making it clear they were no longer afraid and were ready to stand with Jimmy against their bully. The confrontation grew more intense, but in the end, Jimmy and his friends managed to overpower Miles, forcing him to concede defeat. After the victory, Jimmy stepped forward and firmly demanded that Miles put an end to all violence, not just toward him or his friends, but toward anyone in school. Miles, however, met the demand with an indifferent stare, showing no sign of remorse. From a distance, Mr. Action, who had watched everything unfold quietly, beamed with pride. To him, Jimmy hadn't just won the fight. He had reclaimed his courage, confidence, and the dignity that had always been his. Mr. Action realized that even though Jimmy had grown stronger, he still carried the same kind heart, a quality Jimmy himself hadn't fully recognized. The showdown between Jimmy and Miles was quickly captured by bystanders and spread across social media. In no time, the video gained massive attention, even catching the interest of a local news station. The fight stood out not only for its intensity, but also as a symbol of courage, one student daring to rise up against long-standing injustice and bullying.